moving to the Sargon arguments, because I remember now one other arguments that he tends to do. Sargon says the idea of an ethno-state, or the idea of a state with a preferential racial preference, is inherently oppressive, and it is inherently an act of violence, if you will, against minorities. What would you answer to that one?
Well, I don't want to have any minorities at all. So I don't want to do violence to minorities. I don't want to impose an alien lifestyle on minorities. I think the best society is homogeneous and doesn't have any minority groups that feel like they are disprivileged in that society. And so I think there is a legitimate sense in which multicultural societies are oppressive. And if you want to get rid of that kind of subtle multicultural oppression, you have to have homogeneous homelands for all peoples. Now, what you get in a multicultural society is basically this. Every multicultural society was started by one group of people and bears the stamp of that group's identity. And any new group that comes into that society through immigration or conquest or whatever has those standards imposed upon it, and they will feel like an outgroup. They will feel disprivileged. It will chafe against their natures. Now, at a certain point, though, it might be the case that the ruling group loses its confidence and stops insisting upon imposing its standards. And in that circumstance, what happens is, instead of it being one group subtly or not so subtly oppressing another, you get a situation where suddenly it becomes sort of open or covert warfare among different groups to get more, to impose their standards, and so forth. And what happens in societies like that is you will find that the clash of different identities and different groups will wear away their differences oftentimes. You will find that the public realm in these societies loses any distinct characteristics whatsoever. So if you've had a formerly Protestant society that now has a large number of Catholics in it, suddenly you're not going to have a Protestant public square. You might not have a Catholic public square. You might just have to learn to do without any kind of religious expressions at all in public. And so you abandon the public realm, and it just becomes an empty place, a void where nobody feels at home. That's one way that it happens, and that's the most peaceful thing. The other thing is that groups insist on their identities, and this causes, instead of the slow friction of rolling away and knocking off corners and homogenizing everything, you get a hotter, faster friction that blows up, that blows up into violence and hatred and so forth. So neither outcome is desirable. We don't want a society where nobody feels at home, where everybody's identity and everybody's standards are slowly worn away, because what that is not multiculturalism as enrichment. It's multiculturalism as impoverishment. It's multiculturalism as creeping nihilism, basically. The only way to deal with people with radically different opinions is to stop caring about the things that separate you. Right. And that's sort of what liberalism is. Liberal tolerance is basically, it's just sort of creeping nihilism when you get right down to it. But the other alternative, where people take their own sides and constantly fight, well, that's not a good outcome, because eventually that will lead to violence and hatred and bloodshed. So multiculturalism is not a good system, no matter how it fares, right? No matter how you deal with it, it's a form of oppression, or it's a form of homogenization and creeping nihilism, or it's just outright warfare. And eventually what happens is groups will either separate and go in different directions, or one group will dominate another and impose its standards on another. So that's all sounds horrible and oppressive to me. What's the alternative to that kind of oppression? Peaceful separation, going your own way, establishing your own homelands where you can have a way of life that suits you, and it's normative and it's public. rather than something that you can only practice behind closed doors and closed drapes, which is what's happening increasingly in multiculturalizing white societies today.
This is absolutely insightful because I think you present almost the beginning of a metaphor where the public square itself and the meeting of the contributions of individuals to the public square and in the benefit of everyone in an homogeneous society, that in a multicultural society, this public square is subject to a scorched earth policy almost. It's as if, okay, your Christmas tree on the side of the street, that bothers me, and so there's going to be no tree at all. It's not going to be your Christmas tree. It's not going to be my Muslim or Jewish sign, and so there's going to be nothing. Whereas
it's
in the
happy holidays thing, right?
Oh yeah.
we can't have Christmas anymore. We just have holidays. Why? It's bland and inoffensive.
Absolutely. And so this oppression, this little oppression of the multicultural societies, because it doesn't always turn to violence, but it seems that Sargon wants to deny it. And he wants to deny the fact that, yeah, if I live in a society with 70% Muslims, there are things that I will be deprived of that I wouldn't have been deprived of in a fully white society. And so I think that it's important to not hide ourselves from the little oppression that occurs in multicultural societies, from the benefits that we could drag in a homogeneous society that we don't in a multicultural society, and that we need to always push and reveal those disadvantages instead of denying them.